All right, we're back. We're going to talk through a hypertrophy workout. This is actually the one that I learned from Flex Wheeler back in 2008, which I thought was one of the most effective and probably the best results that I got throughout my entire career. I'd already been training and competing for over 20 years at the time I worked with Flex. He completely changed my whole outlook towards bodybuilding at the time. And I'm going to walk you through what I think is to now been shown today with much of the research that's been done with Schoenfeld and his group in Oregon that we've seen that's probably the most effective for hypertrophy. And believe it or not, it's not powerlifting and it's not heavy weights. So when I trained with Flex, we didn't do any squats or any deadlifts. And you might have probably be familiar with some of Dorian Yates's training, and he didn't do squats either. And we're going to take you through what I think is probably the most effective. It's kind of a four-step process. So there's four things involved in it. And the first one's going to be the mind-muscle connection, and we're going to start on the leg extension. We just do one-legged leg extensions, put that down a little bit lighter. And we'll probably do higher reps, somewhere around 15. Flex always had us do 20. But the purpose of this exercise really is just to start to get a little bit of blood in the muscle and to start thinking about the muscle that you're going to be working. We're going to do a leg workout. We're going to be focused mostly on the quads for this section of it. Hamstrings would be a different workout entirely. And so just a one-legged leg extension, reasonably slow. This isn't a 6-second negative, but it's just under control. This gives us a good opportunity, one, to get some blood in the knees because we're going to work on a heavier exercise next, but also just so now you're going to get this muscle queued up so that you can pay attention to what you're working in the next exercise. And we just do a set of, let's say 12 reps and then do each leg. And then we'll take maybe a 90-second rest. It's kind of what we worked on initially, is about a 90-second max out at 2-minute rest period for most of these sets. If we do a really grueling, heavier leg press set, as you'll see coming up, we may get into up to 3 minutes just to get your oxygen back. But generally speaking, we'll stay right around the 2-minute range in between sets and do 3 to 4 sets. And because it's not terribly heavy, you're not creating a lot of fatigue, the number of sets isn't terribly critical at this moment.
One more. Now what do we got?
Good. So let's go over to the leg press next. And we'd probably do 3 sets there, maybe 4, depending on how we felt.
Need some weight on there?
Yep, a little weight on there.
Maybe 3 plates or something?
Sure.
One leg still?
Nope, this will be 2 legs.
Okay.
Now, a couple things to consider here. This is going to be our major exercise. I think John Meadows calls it his blast set. Flex had us, first we would load some plates on and try and get, generally we work in the 20 rep range. Sometimes by the 3rd or 4th set, you're kind of maxed out at about 15 reps. Today's research suggests that maybe that's going to create a lot of fatigue, so you may have to be cautious how many sets you do there initially. But generally, this is where we're going to kind of put everything on the line. The first set, we'll probably do 15 or 20 reps, but we might have been able to do more. But then we're going to add a little more weight. Each subsequent set's going to be harder and harder, and you might only be able to get 18 reps before failure, or within a rep or 2 of failure. You have to kind of get there. And we'll probably pour everything into maybe 2 sets here. So this one would probably be considered just a bit of a warm-up, really.
Back to leg extension?
Nope, this is good. And again, for hypertrophy, we want to rest about 2 minutes. And it's really going to be conditioned upon how your cardiovascular is. What we found is that initially the 2-minute rests, we would get weaker. Each subsequent set, we might even be able to start with more plates on the first and second set and have to pull some to be able to get our 15 plus reps on the 3rd and 4th set, just because oxygen debt became a limiting factor. But within 4 or 5 weeks of doing this twice a week, we were able to keep the heavy weights on with the 2-minute rest periods. And so there was a really good progression there. Certainly some of it's going to be cardiovascular adaptation. But the goal here is to kind of pour everything into this set. This is your major exercise, these 4 sets really. And you work up to maybe 2 that are just complete gut-busting monster sets. So go ahead and hit another set here. We may have put 2 more plates on or 3 more plates on. Just kind of, after a while, you get used to how much weight that you can handle for about 15 reps. We're pumping a ton of blood in there. Those leg extensions already got a little blood into the knees, and so these are going to feel good and they're going to feel fluid. And you've also, because of that mind-muscle connection now, you know that you're contracting the quads on this exercise.
That's crazy.
Now I want you to hop out. And here's one of the things that Flex had us do a lot of, and the research seems to suggest that this is actually beneficial. Between sets, he would have us squat down. So now you're just going to sit down into a squat position like this. And with a lot of blood in the legs from having done those extensions and now these leg presses, you can feel the stretch. And the stretch is key. There's good research now. I think Chris Beardsley has a book, an ebook called Hypertrophy, where he talks about how this is a complementary stimulus to the loading, that this stretching can, in and of itself, have a hypertrophy effect. Now, this wouldn't be true if you were just to, say, stretch in the absence of the weightlifting. It's not necessarily going to have a hypertrophy effect. But within this workout, there's 1 or 2 ways to do this. You can do it between sets. We would squat down for maybe 20 seconds between sets during that 2-minute rest periods before you jump on your next set. Or at the end of a workout, maybe you'd pick a 4th exercise. Right. We're going to do 3 today. But maybe at the end of a workout, you pick a 4th exercise that incorporates a lot of stretch. For legs, it might be, say, a lunge, where you get really deep and get a lot of quad stretch. For chest, it might be a fly. So we'll skip the 3rd, but you dump a lot of energy into there. Depending on how we felt, we might do 2 sets of hack squat.
I'll do another
or we'll go to a lunge. You want to jump in one more?
Yeah. It's starting to feel really horrible, so I figure might as well.
How's that stretch component?
Yeah, it felt good. And my legs feel full of blood. I'll maybe throw a plate on there.
Yep, I got one here.
I think there's one here.
No, I don't. It's all blocked out.
Check it over here. Yeah, might as well go for it, right? Whoa, big mistake. Holy shit.
Now, we talked before about the proper rep range or proper load. And what research suggests is that you can get just as much hypertrophy benefit out of a 5-rep set under, say, an 85% load as you can on a 10 to 12 rep set on maybe a 60% load as you can on a 20-rep set using a 40 or 50% load. The difference is the 5-rep sets are going to, with the heavier loads, are going to make you a little stronger. But both the 5s and the 20s are going to create more fatigue than the 8 to 12 rep range. So what we see is the bros were right. That kind of a hypertrophy range is optimal. Maybe not necessarily because it gives you more hypertrophy than the 5s or the 20s, but because it creates a little less fatigue, and so then you can recover and repeat that workout again sooner. And that frequency, repeating those workouts twice a week, seems to be kind of the ideal range now from what most of the research suggests, and that's the way we trained with Flex in 08. Train every body part twice a week. And so the load really just gets adjusted based on what rep range that you intend to lift within, and getting an adequate load such that when you get to that rep range that you're near failure, within a rep or two of failure. And then between sets again, we'll squat down. Some of you might remember watching Tom Platz's training, and Platz would do those epic leg extension workouts where he would go until he couldn't do any more, and then he would sit under the machine with his legs folded back. And anybody who's ever done a failure set on leg extensions, at the end, you're trying to get out of there as quickly as possible because of the amount of blood that's in your legs. Well, that's what we try and do here. We sit him down, get the stretch, tons of blood. How does that feel?
It feels awesome. Yeah, it was really hard. I wasn't expecting it to be really all that hard coming off the leg extension, but it was.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of blood. The stretching component is huge. And so lastly, we would move to another, like a stretch exercise. Would be a lunge possibly, or a high box one-legged step up. Flex always like to incorporate some sort of isolateral movement. Obviously the one-legged leg extension serves as that as well. But that what we would finish with is a lunge. And generally we could do it just body weight, or you could carry a plate or two. But that lunge will again give you that stretch component that we're looking for. So a lot of full range of motion seems to be more beneficial to hypertrophy than partial ranges of motion. And these kinds of exercises where you're going through that full range of motion, leg press, you buried that nice and deep. You weren't doing short ranges of motion. The more stretch you get on that muscle, the more you're going to be stimulating hypertrophy.
You get everything done in a fairly condensed period of time?
We did. We would do leg training might only take 40 minutes, and if it took 50, it's just because the first 10 minutes was really just getting warmed up for what was. And we talked earlier, you can train long or you can train hard, but you can't do both. And I prefer to do 2-a-day trainings, 40 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at night. So we'd do our quads for 40 minutes. Then at night we'd come back and we'd do 20 or 30 minutes of the same type of training for just hamstrings.
Right.
And that way we would get the benefit of both of those stimuli for all of the hormones and all of the water and glycogen and sodium and the muscles and all of that stuff together is what stimulates hypertrophy. It's not just the load itself. It's that whole environment now we're finding that is going to stimulate hypertrophy.
Well, as you're mentioning the stretch and the length at which you move is huge, right? So if you do a push-up, that requires a certain amount of energy. If you jump up in the air, that requires a certain amount of energy. What if you mix them together in what's called a burpee? How bad is that energy-wise? So that has a lot to do with volume too, and no one ever really equates for that.
Yeah.
So if you add in that stretch component right there, it's going to add a whole other thing to your game that you probably weren't using before.
Yep, range of motion. If somebody's going to do a squat, it kind of be a good idea to get them onto an elevated platform so they can get their butt down deeper. The more stretch you get out of that quad, the more potential that you're going to get for hypertrophy. So within the confines of your joints, we don't want to obviously compromise the joints, and so the loads aren't very, very heavy. That's one of the things about working in the 5-rep range is that the people that were tested in those studies, their joints started to hurt really bad and they started to accumulate a lot of fatigue, and so they weren't recovering from their workouts. And by the end of the study, they were just completely spent. Whereas the folks who stayed in the 10 to 12 rep range, they still had good energy and their joints felt better. So just be cautious with kind of much damage you're creating. And I built most of my career on trying to hurt myself as much as I could. I thought the more pain that I endured and the sorer I was for longer, the better benefit I was getting. And it doesn't seem that research suggests that anymore. And that's the way when I trained with Flex that we focused mostly on the mind-muscle connection, a lot of pump, a lot of stretching, and I was able to recover better from those workouts because I wasn't loading an enormous amount of load. Plus, I mentioned no deadlifts and no squats because those things would hit my lumbar spine pretty hard and my nervous system would just be spent and you'd just be exhausted for 3 days. And if you're doing a bodybuilding split, you're doing, say, legs on Monday, you're doing chest on Tuesday and back on Wednesday, you don't want to be completely spent for the rest of those body parts because you poured so much into just a leg training day.
Right.
So it's a stimulus.
And when you went to Flex, your legs were a weak point, right?
They were, and they became a strong point.
I would figure like he'd be like, oh, let's do a lot of squats.
Yeah.
But squats is too much on your back and maybe too much thickening here and not. What was the reason for no squats?
I don't think he was, well, because as a power lifter, I wouldn't just work my legs. I would incorporate my ass and my hips and my spinal erectors, and everything to me was about leverage.
Wide and
everything
get the
was
bar
leverage.
low.
Yep, and I couldn't get a significant range of motion out of squats. And so when he got me with the mind-muscle connection and the pre-exhaust, and we used a little bit lighter weights than I would normally use, then I was able to train with more frequency.
So if you could squat the way Ben Pekulski squats, maybe he would have had you start with squats.
100%. That's why I mentioned if you get that angle plate and maybe squat at the end of a workout, you could still incorporate those in there. And with the high bar on the angle plate, you put less stress on the lumbar spine. And that way you can recover a little faster.
Right.
So those are some ways that you can do it. I remember Jay Cutler at the end of his career was doing squats again, but he was doing it at the end of the workout with a little bit lighter weights.
Yeah, he did a lot of leg extensions first.
Did a lot of leg extensions first, and his leg press, and he kind of, broke down all the muscle that way. Let's do a walking lunge for folks just so they can see how we do it to finish.
Legs have a lot of blood in them.
A lot of blood. And so you get a lot of good stretch on this, a lot of good stretch in the quad here.
swear to God, I am totally sober. See? A good way to get a stretch is to try to lean back into it. I have a tendency to kind of go here because it's more comfortable. But you should be trying to stack on top of your quad.
And you'll find that you can recover better from a workout that you do a little bit of pre-exhaust mind muscle, you do a little higher repetitions through a full range of motion, stretch between sets. Each subsequent set, you noticed that the weight, even though it wasn't, we didn't pack a whole lot on,
right,
you weren't able to do a ton of repetitions. You were reaching within a rep or two of failure. That's the key component, to get within a rep or two of failure. And that's a fantastic hypertrophy workout. It's not what you do within any one workout. It's what you do cumulatively, consistently, progressively, over time that's going to create that hypertrophy benefit.
Same thing with a diet. It's not one meal, right?
Exactly. So that's my lower body. That's my quad hypertrophy. So we'll jump
without
on.
any squats even. Look at that.
Look at that.
All right, we're going to sign off. Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. That's Stan and Rhino Efferding. We're out of here.